Well, transnational corporations are a relatively new figure on the international scene. However, they began to seek power in the 1970s, but the ones that did that were rare. They were like Nestle, which had a big influence in Switzerland, but most of them just did business, and that was that. And now they have become the major lobbyists in the world. They have their own personnel to lobby governments, to lobby organizations. They were extremely active in trade affairs from the World Trade Organization startup in the late 80s and the early 90s. And now they have their own networks, and they have also, in a very subtle way, wormed their way into government. So the trade treaties are one area in which they work on getting what they want. They don't want to govern. Government is no fun. It's got too much rubbish in it, if you like. What they want is influence, and they want to be in on the regulation. So what they have done in the trade treaties is include a clause which is now in 1,000 and some treaties, because there are lots of bilateral treaties, in which two major things are included that they wanted for a long time. The first is called Investor-to-State Dispute Resolution, ISDS, which allows a company that believes that a government, a sovereign government, has passed a law which is going to hurt their profits, and they have a right to sue that government in a private court with private arbitrators and say, you are costing us X millions because your law is going to stop our profits from growing in a particular area. And there are 800 cases like this in the world. Not all of them have been judged, but the majority that have been judged are in favor, it's not surprising, of the corporation. And so a poor country like Ecuador can be told, well, you now have to pay $4 billion because you passed a law that said we can't drill for oil in a particular area of your country. And we thought we could, so you have interfered with our profits. And this happens all the time. One case which was won by Egypt, Egypt was sued by Veolia, and Veolia said, you raised the minimum wage, this is going to hurt our profits, and therefore we are suing you. They lost. They lost, but you never really lose. I mean, they never lose because the government is obliged to pay costs, no choice. And that costs a lot. That can cost millions to pay the costs of the trials. The second thing is regulatory cooperation, which they haven't finished with yet, but they're on the way. And that is to say, we want to be in there at the beginning when a state starts to develop regulations on food, pharmaceuticals, automobiles, anything. And we want to have the power to say what those regulations ought to be, because regulations cost us money. Regulations are what save people. They are what protect us. But for the companies, they're just costs. And so who cares if there is rubbish in the food and in the pharmaceuticals, etc.? Well, let me give you an example of accounting. Accounting sounds like something very boring, just numbers, and who cares? And every company has to have an accountant and so on. But what the corporations have done is to put the people from the big four accounting companies, also transnationals, into something called the International Accountability. They have put together it was an informal organization called the International Accounting Standards Board. Now it has become official. Now they make the accounting rules. Now that doesn't sound like anything that's very serious, but if they say we cannot have country-by-country accounting by a corporation, you can't say profits in Switzerland, then in Germany, then in Britain, and so on. You can say just profits in Switzerland and then rest of world. So this protects tax havens because you don't know where the money was actually made, and it makes it extremely difficult for a government to say, you, Corporation X, owe us in taxes so much, because they don't know. And the corporations aren't obliged to tell them. So this is an informal group which is very little known by the public, but they make rules which are fantastic protection for the profits of the corporations. The treaties that have been signed since the war, Second World War, are about 3,000 and some. Nobody knows all of them because there are lots of bilaterals. Every country in Europe, for instance, probably has an average of 12 or 13 treaties with other countries, either in Europe or in the South, but very often it is a system in which one powerful country, a rich one like Germany, has a treaty with a poor state like Pakistan. That was the first one of these bilateral trade and investment treaties, as they are called. And they put a clause in, which was the ISDS clause, which said a state has the right, they put in this clause, the ISDS, Investor to State Dispute Resolution Clause, which says a corporation has the right to sue legally a government which has passed a law which, in the view of the company, is a law that will hurt their profits, present or future profits. And this clause was a total innovation. Not many people noticed, and everybody thought, well, okay, because Germany has a court system which is honest and fair and separate from the rest of the government. In Pakistan, we don't know, but it's probably very corrupt, etc. So this became a rule, a general rule, which was used by practically everybody. But now they want to have the same sort of rule for perfectly okay governments. I mean, we know that the United States judiciary, it may make things we consider mistakes, but still, it's an independent system. So are the court systems in European countries. But now the corporations want exactly the same clause that they would have with Pakistan or some other very poor and perhaps corrupt country. So these are the kinds of things that they do so that they can get the best of what they want. And they have won this sort of lawsuit in probably something like 300 cases. It's hard to give a number because often they don't announce what the result was. So, but it was a ploy to move from the poor countries to the much richer ones and to have the same privileges. So what they want is not to govern. What they want is privilege. We come first, and then after that you can decide what you want to do, but us first. For our profits, that's the main thing, getting our profits and a bit extra if we can. Well, on you and me, they don't have an impact at all. We wouldn't notice, except that they take money from governments. So if you take the equivalent of half of the budget for schools, for instance, you're certainly going to have an impact in a poorer country because they have to spend paying back the corporation for a supposed fault in their passing a law which was perfectly legitimate and passed by a parliament and so on. So we don't know about it. We don't feel it personally. But the government certainly feels it because suddenly they have several $1 billion less than they had before. So that is the impact. The government is forced because if they don't pay, what happens? Well, their ships, for instance, get stuck somehow in a harbor far, far away. Different things will be, their goods will be boycotted. This is the way the retaliation works. If they say, no, I'm not going to pay, can't pay, won't pay. Well, they have to pay, or they will have very serious consequences, and the corporations are more powerful than practically all countries. I think that what must be done is first to educate the public, because not many people know what is happening in these treaties. Politics is much more complicated than it used to be. I sometimes say, when I started off, it was the war in Vietnam, and you could say, U.S., get out of Vietnam, and everybody understood what you were talking about. But now if I say, look, the ISDS is robbing the country, they say, what is this thing? And so there has to be a program, I think, for NGOs and peace organizations, for that matter. We need to have a campaign of public education, because if the new enemy, if the new adversary has shifted the base, then we need to know about it. Otherwise, we can't do an effective struggle. We can't say what we want and how do we get it. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, is to make coalitions, to make big coalitions of organizations. All right, I don't work exactly on the same things as the peace organizations, but we're close enough. That's my concerns. Those are yours. And we have this space where we can work together. And this is an area where I think we're beginning to understand that, because with the TTIP, the treaty between the United States and Europe, particularly, I have to say, thanks to the Germans, we became an international movement. The United States and Europe were working together. All the countries of Europe were working together. And there were thousands in each country. We had a formal poll of making a request to the European Union, for which you have very formal rules. You have to have so many signatures, and they have to represent a certain proportion of the population, etc. And we got every single country in Europe except for Cyprus, Malta, and the 3 Baltic countries. So that's a pretty good show of having, Romania and Bulgaria and Spain and France all in the same movement. I think this is a big victory. Not very much noticed, but a big victory. So coalitions which are strong, which can make international movements, which can have a particular date to do a particular thing, and to make ourselves visible. And it worked. Of course, the corporations always come back. They are now coming back with the TTIP. Donald Trump may put it on the agenda, we don't know, but we're prepared that this should happen, because they never give up. The corporations are absolutely decided to get A, B, or C. I can't really say something about that because I'm too old. I was born in the generation we used to have to type things and put them on mimeograph machines and crank them out, and so now it's totally changed. But information is going to be the big industry. Knowing about you, exactly what your tastes are, what are the ads I can put on your Facebook page, what are the ways I can get you to buy this or that. When I read about these things, my mouth is open, because it's astonishing how much information they can collect about a person if that person is not very, very careful. So this is an industry which one article I read says is second only to the fossil fuel industries. Well, the Greta Thunberg is a lovely 16-year-old who just decided that this was wrong, and that she sat outside her school and she protested by herself in a completely nonviolent way. And then suddenly this took off. That's why I tell people, look, you never know what is going to change things, because sometimes a word, something you say, something you write, something you do together is going to be taken up by other people, and suddenly it goes viral, and you can't say in advance what will happen, but that is why we must keep going. That is why whether the tendency of the future seems to be with us or not, we have to keep going. And for me, climate change is the big issue, and it affects absolutely everything else, including the corporations. The large fossil fuel corporations have not been smart enough to invest significantly in renewables. That's what they should have done. But now renewables are much cheaper than fossil fuels. So I think we may be in for a moment in which they are simply, under economic rules, are going to lose a lot of money because more people will buy renewables, and the more offers there are of renewables, the more people will buy them, simply because they're cheaper for energy. So I hope that the combination of cheaper renewables and the militant actions of many, many groups throughout the world, because it's become a world issue now, will together bring about something which can save us from this cataclysmic end to life on Earth. And this is the most serious possibility and the most serious threat that we have to confront right now.